Welcome to the second series of the We Care Virtue Talk. On this episode, I had a conversation with a South African creative who goes by the name Robin Thirdfloor, and we discussed men's mental health, which is actually observed in the month of June. Enjoy! Briefly introduce yourself. What do you do? Where are you from? I would like to know a bit more about you.
All right. So my real name is Simphiwe Nyawose. I am born and raised in Durban in a township called Umlazi. I am a musician who goes by the name Robin Thirdfloor. That's how a lot of people know me. And I am passionate about creativity. I'm passionate about just exploring human potential. I feel like for me, life is art for me now. I view life as art. I view life as lessons. And that's how I just go about life.
Okay, awesome. Awesome. That's really interesting. And this is the end of June, but the whole June has been Men's Mental Health Month. And
Sure.
I thought it would be great to have a conversation with a man and then just talk about mental health in general, but also just bringing it down to a bit more specifics, because we hear about mental
Sure.
health awareness, but we don't really get a lot of information, especially to do with men's mental health. So, yeah, I have a few questions that I'm interested to learn a bit more about mental health from a man's perspective. And so I'll get right into it. The first question that I have for you is, what does mental health mean to you?
Okay. So I've always heard people say mental health, right? And it's like, okay, cool. But I like the word mental wellness because it really just tells you what it is that you are aiming for. Because mental health is very on the, it's in between somehow, right?
Yeah.
So I always like the word mental wellness because that for me, it kind of tells us where we're trying to go, right? But mental health basically is your mental state, right? How are you in terms of your mental state? So are you going through some stuff? Are you able to, because we are supposed to go through stuff in anyway as people, but are you able to cope? That is basically what it is. Are you able to cope? That's how I view mental health. But I do still like the term mental wellness though, because it goes into yes.
I understand where that also comes from, and I feel like in the term itself, it kind of boxes what you're trying to express, and yet when you talk of mental wellness, it kind of brings out certain stages, kind of blocks it down, because well-being could be relaxation, but if you say mental health, it kind of just a whole thing which needs to be broken down. Yeah.
For sure.
Okay. My other question is, as a creative, have you experienced issues to do with mental well-being or mental health as a music artist? Have you experienced anything to do with mental health at your personal level?
For sure. So as an artist, you go through a lot of things. I'm sure you could attest to this as well. We go through a lot of things. But I think for me, where it really started was growing up, right? And this is the thing about mental health related issues. We never necessarily even know that type of vocab. We don't even have access to that type of vocab. So you think you are sad, right? You think you are just, going through it, right? You just think you're going through it, but you never really know that there's some underlying things there that are there, right? So on a personal level, I think there's a lot of issues for me that when I look back now, I'm like, oh, at that point of my life, I was affected, right, in that way. I can point out just like two things
Yeah.
that I feel like, really contributed to either sort of like like really affected my mental health, right?
Yeah.
I was raised by a single mother,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I never knew my dad up until like when I was in varsity, right? So all of those pressures, right? Like all of those pressures when you're growing up and you're like a young man who's trying to find himself in the world, but you don't have that figure who's going to be helping you navigate, from being a boy to, essentially being a man. But also, I had an incident when I was in high school, right? That kind of like changed the trajectory of my life in a way, where I got hurt, right? I fell and I lost a few of my teeth, right? And that was one of like the biggest contributors to like a really like a downfall of my mental health, because that now meant that I had to imagine you are an adolescent, a teenager. This is where you are supposed to be like exploring and is the dating thing and whatever, and now you have um this flaw,
Yeah.
this dental flaw that now you're having to, navigate. So I was affected by that, as a teenager, and I didn't even have the vocab, right? That a lot of my anxiety was coming from, that
An
incident up
incident.
until a later stage where it was like, okay, cool. So for me, those two incidences, having to grow up in a situation that was like that, also not in the best background, I'm not coming from the best background, also, caused a lot of anxiety as well, and this is all vocab that I'm only like understanding now as a grown adult. So I'm like, oh, that was what it was,
Wow.
you know, not having enough resources or means has made me become this type of person when I'm engaging with finances, for example, or whatever. So yeah, definitely there's been some stuff on the personal side, but on the art side, I think what has affected me has been the fact that I like doing things my own way, right? And that comes with a lot of backlash. Not
Comes the
necessarily
price.
backlash, but
There's
like
definitely a
it
price.
comes with a lot of, yeah, there's a price, right? And that price is definitely felt on your pocket, because it's like you are not doing what everybody's doing, so you might not receive the same results that everybody's getting, right? And it might just take a bit longer for you to get what is due to you, because people don't know what you are doing. My music is not the mainstream music. It's not like what is popping. Like I make what I feel like I want to make and I want to see in the world, right?
Yeah.
But that comes with a price. As you were saying, that comes with a price, because, you know, bills need to be paid and stuff like that. So that has definitely, had a toll on my mental health and affected me in a lot of ways over the years.
That's quite interesting. And I could relate with many levels that you've expressed. And it's quite interesting to hear that you are now piecing it's like you're attaching names or meaning to experiences that have already passed. And which just goes to show that a lot of us could have experienced something to do with our mental health or our mental well-being without realizing that's what it is. And like you rightfully said, a lot of us will say, I'm sad, but not knowing to the extent of how is that sadness affecting your day-to-day activities. And
For sure.
like you've mentioned, like your personal experiences as well, and from adolescent stage, and you only understand it at this stage when so many years have passed. and you can't go back to the past. So it's, yeah, but I think the lesson to pick from this is there's a lot of open-mindedness. And I think it's also possible to heal something that affected you in the past while you are living in your present based off the knowledge you know now. So I think that's what's great about this, that the understanding of what mental health is, or even just the interest to know what it is. I think it all stems from those conversations. So thank you so much for sharing that. Now, you have kind of answered something that the next question was going to be, is based on your location. Do you think your community is doing enough when it comes to men's mental health, specifically men's mental health? Do you think where you're coming from, the community that you're involved in, do you think it's doing enough?
I don't think it's doing enough. And the reason why I say this is because, firstly, I am an African man. And African masculinity, by definition, is provider, right? It is the strength, the pillar, right? So a lot of whatever we are facing as African men, from being African boys, by the way, because you are being groomed to be an African man, it is from that point of like, you need to be strong, right? Everything that you are going through isn't necessarily something that you should put a lot of attention to, right? You are the pillar. You are the one that needs to hold all the other people together, right? So in terms of that, like, I don't think there's much that's done for men in that regard, because we are men. You kind of like just molded to be this strong figure, and your feelings don't exist. And it's pretty sad because the stats, right? Like, we are seeing the stats, male suicide is really like up, right?
Yeah.
And the reason why it's like that is because men can't speak. Men are going through things and they can't, find people or have the environment, a safe enough environment, without feeling shame to actually speak about whatever it is that they are going through. Right? It's not afforded to them. There's certain things that men aren't supposed to really, like, you aren't seen as someone who's supposed to be talking about that. I'll make an example for you. It's so normal for women to talk about heartbreak, right? Like, women can even laugh about it and be like, I was so heartbroken, that guy, remember that guy, or whatever, right? And it's such an easy thing for women to be, able to communicate. But for men, that's hardly a conversation, right? That is hardly a conversation. It's always like, on to the next one. And it's like, really, bro? Like, really? That's, we all know that you're probably hurting. This is, something that you were invested in for probably like a long time. It can't just be a dusting off the shoulder type of thing and then you just continuing with life, but that is the culture of African men that we've grown, into basically in our society.
Oh, I have a lot of things to say, but there's something that I want to add on or find out more before I ask my next question. So you've mentioned something that even men to men or man to man, men generally don't express themselves. Do you think that is coming from society, or at some point the men must also take up that initiative to say, we feel this way, our feelings are valid? So amongst ourselves, even before the communities are involved or the next person, maybe like the other gender is involved, why don't we come up with our own ways to handle our issues in a way that you kind of debunk some of the theories and also just unlearn certain habits? Because some things come from habits and then you take it up as a personality or a characteristic. So do you think men should take that angle as well?
I think that is something that's happening right now.
Yeah.
Definitely starting to happen, especially with the younger generation. I can say, personally, I have a circle of men which I'm able to be vulnerable with, right? And they can also be vulnerable with me. I've created that environment for myself, but it needed me to be intentional about it, right? To be comfortable being vulnerable, right?
Mhm.
Like that's not something that's normal for men to be vulnerable. Like it's
Yeah.
it's it's not a thing that society, really pushes for. So I had to go against the grain and be like, I'm tired of feeling these things on my
Yeah.
own and
Yeah.
having to deal with these things on my own when I have people at my disposal who could listen, right? And I think also me doing so helped my friends and my peers also feel comfortable in doing so as well, because now we have that relationship. We have that relationship where they can open up to me as well and tell me like, hey bro, like that breakup really did something to me. And
Yeah.
we'll have that conversation without me judging them, without me, shaming them for feeling certain things. Because I think that's one of the things that made it hard for men to be vulnerable. It was
Ooh.
the shame that comes with um, being vulnerable. And then
Wow.
men will be like, you know what? Um, I won't talk anymore,
Ish.
because whenever I do talk, I
Mm-hmm.
get shamed for it. Like it's not supposed to be a thing that I am doing. I'm not supposed to show any weakness, because my weakness is used against me, right? Like I've had conversations with men where they will say those types of things and they will be like, um, I once was vulnerable to someone, and I told them about like my situation, and then a couple of years later this person used that information against me,
Ah.
right? And
Yeah.
then at that point they closed off, right? And at that point they just closed off, and they were like, I don't want to be vulnerable anymore. And that is a common thing. It's more common than you'd probably, like it's just more common, right, in our society, that a lot of men might have opened up at some point, but because of how that turned out, they were just
Response.
like, I don't want to do this anymore. And yeah, and that's pretty sad though. It's
Yes.
pretty sad, but I do understand when you were saying that, could men foster these communities, foster this, these types of relationships without having to expect society to do that for them? For sure. I definitely feel like it's already a thing that's happening. We are seeing organizations come through where, they are encouraging that. We are seeing these men's communities.
Yeah.
I'm seeing even online as well, you're seeing these platforms that are encouraging that to be a thing. So I definitely feel like
It's
it's a new
brewing.
conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a new conversation that is brewing where men are actually doing that. But there
Yes.
is still more to be done in
Yeah.
terms of helping people rid themselves of the shame. I think that's
That's
the biggest thing, to rid yourself from the shame.
from the shame. And yeah, thank you for sharing that. Two things I've picked is certain things come from a point of shame. And the other part is also being comfortable to be vulnerable. Not that men are not vulnerable, but it's the comfortability in being vulnerable. I think those are key areas. And my last question, and I wish we could chat even more, but my last question for you is what kind
For
of
sure.
future do you envision, and what role can you play to bring more awareness to men and young boys on issues around mental health?
So the type of future that I envision is, I believe vulnerability is a superpower, right? Let's start there, right? Like I believe vulnerability is a superpower. And the reason why I believe vulnerability is a superpower is because I feel like it's the one thing that connects us as humans. The more I tell you about myself, the more you can tell me about you.
Yeah,
It's like this beautiful thing that, that humans are able to do even without like really noticing it. Like if I could, in this conversation, tell you about like my family, it will just happen that you will also share something about your family, right? Like
yeah, yeah,
and it's such a beautiful thing that just happens without us even knowing. So I believe that vulnerability could be the answer, for a brighter future, in terms of like men in the future, them putting their, making their mental health a priority. I foresee that if we are able to be vulnerable, if I'm able to share my story without any guilt or shame, to tell people that a certain experience broke me, right? But here I am today. I've dealt with it, and maybe also be able to share how I was able to go through that, or how I was able to overcome that. I feel
Yeah.
like that would really do something, because I feel like everyone's looking at each other in the face like this. Like, okay, yeah, mental health, whatever, but like, let's hear your story, you
Yeah.
know.
True. True.
And it is in our stories that we can really, build a future whereby the vulnerability will be something that won't be something to be ashamed of, right? So I definitely foresee a future that is filled, or I'd love to see a future that is filled with vulnerability from men, where
Yeah.
men are actively just sharing their stories, for them to heal first and foremost, because there's a certain amount of healing that is attached to sharing, right? Like,
Yeah. True.
I'm an artist, so I'm kind of privileged in a way, because I'm able to share my stories via my art.
Through your music.
And that's, yeah, that's like a privilege of mine, but I also try with doing that to be vulnerable, right? Like, to be vulnerable. I recently released a project right now. It's called Uvalega, with a Swiss producer. His name is Dejot. He's an electronic music producer, and we came together to create this really beautiful project called Uvalega. It's inspired by the lockdown and my feelings during the lockdown. So the lockdown presented so many challenges in my life, right? My finances were dwindling, a long-term relationship of mine ended, and I was really distraught, right? Like, I was going through the most. My mental health there was really like,
It was tested, eh?
and I took that, exactly, and I
Yeah.
took all of that and I put it into the music, and I shared that. Like, I shared that. If you listen to the music, you will hear about the heartbreak. You will hear about, like, how when the money was low, what was happening. And I think that is the thing that we need. We need the vulnerability from people who have a platform. If you have a platform, no matter how small you might think your platform is, for you to be vulnerable, we need to make it cool. We need to make vulnerability a cool thing, because that's the only thing that can connect us as human beings, right? When kids go on Instagram, they see perfect,
Yeah.
right? Like, they see propped up images, they see
Exactly.
all these
It's a
things, these
fake thing. It's a
lifestyles that are,
facade. Yeah.
exactly, right? Like, so they don't see a place for their brokenness,
Yeah. Oh, yes.
or a place whereby their brokenness can be embraced. They don't see that. They
Yeah.
see these perfect pictures. They see these people posting at these really nice places with the beach, with the bikini, and all of that, which is great, by the way. We would all love to take a picture once or twice a year at the
Yeah.
Bahamas. That would be nice. We'd
That would
appreciate that,
definitely be nice,
right?
even for my
That
mental
would be
health.
very nice, you know but also I think it's important to share about, like, real stuff,
That's true.
share about real stuff on our platforms, where we are really engaging people on a human level,
I
because at the
agree.
end of the day, especially as artists, we are here to mirror society, and society isn't LV bags and whatever bags, and that's it.
And
It's
I,
about hardships,
yeah,
right? Like, it's about hardships and going through hardships and finding ways to go through hardships and dealing with things that
yeah.
are that we are facing in life.
And thank you so much for sharing that. You've touched on so many areas, even the part of what you are doing to, like, what is your role to bring that information closer to the understanding, even just for young men and the boys that are growing up. I mean, a boy will listen to your music and they'll understand that it's okay to actually be vulnerable and share your experiences with the world, and you can use it. You can use your art. You can talk to
Mhm.
someone the way you've created a community where you're able to be vulnerable with peers, I think that's quite commendable. And I think we have touched on most of the areas that I actually wanted to have this conversation with you for. And I would love to just say thank you so much for your time. And thank you for joining me on this session of We Care Virtual Talk with me. And it's been quite interesting. I think we should do another one. We definitely need to talk more about these issues.
For sure. Thank you so much for having me on your platform. I also really commend you and your work as well. I know you put mental health at the forefront of, your creations and the things that you are creating. So thank you so much for, pioneering that, for making sure that that's a thing that you want people to really, think about, you want people to engage with, because what is art if it's not saying anything, right?
Yeah. Ooh.
So thank you for also doing that as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Until next time, we'll definitely have a conversation on this a bit more.
All right. Cool.
All right.
If you loved this conversation, do let me know. Thank you so much for listening in and for watching. Until next time on the We Care Virtual Talk with Alice.